Guten Abend, meine Freunde. Willkommen bei Hanover Global Network, wo Wahrheit und Rechenschaftspflicht an oberster Stelle stehen. Okay, welcome to Hanover Global Network, where truth and accountability reign supreme. Now, as I have said, it's a protest of sorts that I'm going to stay away from making many videos for now, other than videos related to the two unknown, sudden, suspicious passing of the two gentlemen, Mr. Franklyn and Mr. Frederick. Now, today I'm going to speak to motive, a word that I believe the constabulary force is very familiar with. And I am going to ask some W questions, especially why. So the reason that I want to pay a little bit of attention to these two matters, or these two cases, is because I believe that it has serious implications for the perception of justice within the society. And perception of justice sometimes seemingly is more important than justice itself. You cannot have a society where people believe that there is something wrong with the justice system, where people believe that there is a perception that there isn't justice, or there is a perception that there is not a thorough enough effort in the direction to seek justice. When that happens, it causes chaos in the society. It encourages, in some respects, vigilantes. And this is something that we do not desire in a civilized society. Now, a lot of what I have gathered and my understanding of these matters was procured from people that I know personally, locally. And when I say locally, I'm talking about right here in New York, from friends and associates who are thoroughly familiar with this sort of matter. And also I have spoken to people that I know very well, okay, locally, who are retired and who have experience in this sort of matter. Okay? I believe that I have gathered enough information to ask some very pertinent questions. And based on what I have heard, that people who are even currently speaking on these matters from the constabulary side, they themselves are very familiar with standard operating procedures as to what should be done when there is a sudden, suspicious, or unknown death. I have actually been told that people who are speaking on these matters are actually proficient at what they do. Okay? And when they were serving in prosecutorial capacity on behalf of the force, performed their duty with excellence. So I am starting to believe that whatever took place in terms of procedures on these two particular cases were not by accident and were not as a result of incompetence or lack of knowledge. So then the question must be asked, what was the motive? The question must be asked, was this a one-off or a two-off in this case? Because there are two cases where it seems that the same sort of methodology was followed. So was this a two-off? That everything was done properly generally in other cases, but in these two particular cases, there was some deviation from standard operating procedures? Was it an accident that the procedures were not followed on these particular two cases? Was there a lack of oversight? And even when things became clear that procedures were not followed, was their leadership shown to say, look, we got to take another look at this, and we have got to ensure that we follow proper procedures? Or was it that evidence or material evidence might have been compromised or tainted? So then there was an attempt to say, oh my God, we made a mistake. So we got to, in some respects, do damage control on the situation. Was that the reason why? Then there are far-fetched reasons circulating in social media. Is it possible that this is a political attempt to say, oh, don't worry, there's not much crime in Grenada? Is this an attempt politically to ensure that the statistics of certain crimes are not accounted for? Is that possibly a motivation? Again, as I have said, it seems that the people who are speaking on these matters currently or recently are very familiar with the letter of the law. So I don't suspect or I don't believe that is a case of incompetence. So then the question is, why weren't procedures, typical standard operating procedures, weren't followed as is usually? Because I have been told that generally, if there is a sudden, suspicious, or unknown death, or even in an accident, okay, immediately 2 persons are contacted. Generally, in very short space of time, the medical examiner is contacted and the coroner is contacted. So if it is credible, which I believe it is, as Mr. Hood has said, that in some respects he communicated with the magistrate of the district, especially in Mr. Franklyn's case, and she in some respects may have said or implied that standard operating procedures were not followed, that she was not contacted, that he or she was not contacted in connection with the death of Mr. Franklyn, which again, as I have said, is standard operating procedure. And I believe that the same sort of thing was done for Mr. Frederick. So the question is again, what was the motivation for deviating from standard operating procedures on those 2 particular cases? What was exceptional? What was special on those 2 particular cases? Is it that there is some sort of disregard for the family of these 2 gentlemen? That they thought that they weren't worthy of a thorough investigation? I don't believe that in this line of business that the people concerned in terms of investigations jump to conclusions. But usually I believe the best approach is to leave all options open. Will those options explode? Then the question is, there's a social aspect of these particular situations. After all, when someone passes, that person has a family. So I believe that the job of the constabulary force is not just to be critical and logical and reasonable in investigating the matter, but there's also a social aspect, okay, in the way you deal with the family of the deceased. Based on all reports, it seems like both families do not believe that they were treated or dealt with in a way that is customary, in a way that is deserving of a grieving family. Why was there a deviation from standard operating procedures? Now let's get to some more why questions. Now we've seen in recent times, after over a year, that the constabulary force and the DPP may have recommended to the coroner to do an inquest. Now again, as I have said before, this is not the duty of the constabulary force, nor the duty of the DPP. The coroner is supposed to be an independent figure, and in some respects is a whole distinct and independent institution, and should remain so for very good reasons. I believe Grenada is a very small place, so even when the magistrate of the district would have heard about this particular matter, why didn't the magistrate, knowing their particular duty, step in and ask question as to why they were not informed? Why did it take over a year for the constabulary force and the DPP to recommend that an inquest should be done? Why was there a dereliction of duty in some respects of the magistrate of the district? Why was there that deviation from standard operating procedures? Again, this particular case was all over the media, social media and local media. So why didn't the magistrate of the district see it fit? Because again, the coroner, which is the magistrate of the district, has much leverage to act. What they do is not dependent on what the constabulary force says, neither what the DPP says. Matter of fact, as I have said, irrespective of what the constabulary force does or the DPP does, the coroner has much extensive leverage to act. So why did the magistrate of the district remain a lame duck on this issue? On both issues, because both issues got a lot of public attention. Is it that the particular magistrate of the district may have been appointed and not elected, right? So the question is, was there some sort of pressure not to act? Could that have been the case? Now, the harmonious functioning and civilized functioning of the society depends on separation of powers. In no way should the executive branch seem to influence the legislative branch or the judicial branch. And because of that separation of powers, I don't believe that the judicial branch should be subject to the executive branch in any way or feel threatened or pressured by the executive branch. But of course, that is an ideal situation. There may be perversion of that situation. There may be perversion of the separation of powers. All in all, I believe it is critical. I want the Grenadian people to understand that this is a very, very delicate and serious matter. No one should jump to any conclusions as to what happened and what did not happen. But one thing is for sure, that it must seem that everything is being done by the respective institutions and authority in the pursuance of justice. Based on what is circulating in the public space, it doesn't seem that that is the case. That there's a large section of the population that does not believe that there was a thorough attempt to try to achieve justice in this particular case. Some may even say there was a perception of incompetence. There was a perception by some of what they may describe as a cover. Again, this does not sit well with the population and does not do good for the current administration. I believe that the current administration should use every legal channel and every proper channel to ensure that whatever was done properly. Not by direct involvement, but by ensuring the proper arm of government is doing exactly what they have to do. Even if it's just a public call for a second look to be taken at this. Now I'm trying to understand. Again, at this stage, I believe the constabulary force and the DPP has no right speaking on these matters anymore. In one particular case, it has already been referred to the coroner, and an inquest was recommended. So now, it is the duty of the coroner to decide, first investigate preliminary, and decide whether or not an inquest is required. Again, not because the constabulary force suggested that an inquest should be done, or the DPP suggested that an inquest should be done. That does not mean that the coroner should act. The coroner should not be influenced, okay, by the constabulary force nor the DPP, but within their own perception of the value of doing an inquest, okay? But obviously, seeing that this was not done from the beginning of the situation, I believe, of course, that the coroner should do a preliminary investigation to determine if an inquest is required. And if such inquest is required, then by all means, they should proceed. As I have said before, based on what is required by law, I believe that there are very good cases. These two cases should have an inquest. But again, that is just my opinion. I also believe that to allay any worries or fears by the families of Mr. Franklyn and Frederick, that the coroner, in this case, should both come in the public space and speak to the Grenadian people, okay? They themselves, both coroners of those districts, should come in the public space and have a press conference of sort and speak to the Grenadian people to allay any fears of possible improprieties being done on those two particular cases. For all that was said by the constabulary force and what was said by the DPP, nowhere did they address the matter of deviation from standard operating procedures. The question is, even after a year that they prescribed that there should be an inquest, which again is not their duty to do, but the question is, why did you wait for a year to prescribe an inquest? And the question is, why did you deviate from standard operating procedures? You had an entire press conference and no one spoke to the reason why standard operating procedures were deviated from. That was an opportunity to explain to the Grenadian people as to why standard operating procedures were deviated from, even if it was just to allay any fears of improprieties. But no one addressed why standard operating procedures were deviated from. So again, these are serious matters. Even if it may be a few people that believes that in some respects this was not properly handled, again, it is the duty of those concerned to allay the fears of the Grenadian people so that they can have confidence that these sort of things may not be repeated in the future. In diesem Sinne, guten Abend.